Hello, this is for the subject risk management and the topic for this video is risk classification systems. Okay, so tapos na tayo dun sa risk assessment wherein you have to, risk identification and risk rating. Dito naman, risk classification. Okay, although yes, you already, identified the risk, you've already decided which are significant or not. You have your priority risk already. Pero dito sa classification systems, kumbaga, further risk ranking pa din siya. Kasi one of the classifications is ito, short, medium, and long-term risk. Siyempre, yung short-term, in a way, siya yung uunahin mo kasi it's affecting the day-to-day operations of the business. And then, you have your medium, and then you have yung long-term risk. But that doesn't mean na hindi mo na agad i-deal with yung medium and long-term kasi medium and long-term naman sila. But what it only implies is that yung medium and long term, it affects the company on the medium and long term then. So, in a way, yung possible courses of action to address them would not be, could not be implemented din naman in the short term, and they would have to be addressed then in that particular period then, medium or long term. But, of course, how to deal with hindi naman sabay-sabay, but merong ranking nga, diba? Risk ranking and priority din, okay? But you're not exactly ignoring the others just because they're medium term or long term, okay? So, ayan. So, itong classification na to, it's not, again, yung classification, it would still depend on the company, but it's not a formalized system. Itong short, medium, and long-term classification of risk. Kumbaga, para nga lang ito matulungan yung company din to identify kung related ba siya sa operations or if it would affect yung day-to-day operations ng business. Normally, pag sa operations, yun yung short term. And then, pag sa tactics, yun yung medium term. And then, yung long term, of course, overall strategy ng company. Okay? Yung distinction, not really clear-cut. Kasi nga, as I said, hindi naman porke medium and long-term to is hindi mo na i-deal with currently. Okay? You still have to deal with it. Pero kumbaga hindi ganon ka-rigid or hindi ganon ka-extensive agad yung iniisip mo na resolution to these types of risk, medium and long-term. Okay? But still, ito, reality. There will be some short-term risks to strategic core processes then, and there may be some medium-term and long-term risks that could impact the operational core processes. So, again, kind of not exactly confusing, pero parang ganun na nga, na although, di ba, you already identified them as short-term, medium, and long-term, but still, the medium could affect the long-term, or the short-term, and then the long-term could still affect the short-term and the medium. Yes. Okay, so short-term risk has the ability to impact the objectives, key dependencies, core processes, with the impact being immediate. Okay, so ang tawag dito, the reason it's classified as short-term risk is gawa nga nung yung impact niya is immediate. Pag nangyari siya, andyan na ngayon. Andyan agad yung impact. Okay, examples nito, unplanned disruptive events, okay, which could be associated with cost control in the organization. Okay. Medium-term risk, ang ability to impact the organization following a short delay after the event occurs. So, kung nangyari, merong konting delay before mo ma-feel yung impact. Okay? Maintain effective core processes, management of tactics, projects, and other change programs. So, example niyan, let's say compliance with rules and regulations. Let's say hindi ka nakapag-renew agad ng permit nyo, business permit, January, di ba January, ang deadline nun. Let's say, na-miss nyo ng January, naalala nyo, February na lang. So, you did, file kayo, tapos hindi, kumbaga in a way, merong delay, na konti lang, okay? Tapos, sa nyo makikita yung impact, na bigyan kayo ng penalties and whatnot. Pero essentially, pag business permit, medyo immediate pa yan. So, let's say, SEC, yung submission ng reportorial requirements, diba? May deadline, tapos pag lumabas kayo sa deadline, hindi naman kayo agad ipe-penalize, pero later pag kayo humingi ng certificate of good standing talaga. So, pag nanghingi kayo ng certificate of good standing, ayan, i-audit kayo, i-monitor, i-check kung kayo ba ay nag-submit on time. Kapag hindi, may penalty. Ganyan. And of course, same with BIR. May penalties na you have to pay yung tax dues, of course, and then yung penalties there. Okay? Ayan. So, although hindi nyo agad na comply, di ba, yung requirements, may delay before nyo before kayo mag-suffer ng consequence. Okay? And then long-term, ability to impact the organization sometime after the event occurs. Development and delivery of efficacious strategy. Okay? Let's say, magandang example siguro ito maybe in Nokia. Okay. Nokia is the leading cell phone manufacturer back then, 'di ba? Pero again, hindi kasi siya hindi siya nagkaroon ng initiative to improve their product. So naungusan ng mga smartphones, 'di ba? Mga touchscreen phones, hindi sila nakasunod kasi it's possible na stubborn sila, they don't want to change their machineries, they don't want to change their processes. But ayun nga, yung effect niya hindi agad immediate, 'di ba? Nakakabenta pa naman sila ng phones hanggang sa mas dumami yung manufacturers ng mga smartphones, and then naging, outpace na yung mga cellphones nila, 'di ba? Na hindi ganoon ka dami yung features, unlike of course sa mga smartphones natin. So ayan, medyo matagal yung before nila nakita yung effect sa kanila, or before nila siguro i-admit na talagang great yung impact sa kanilang business. And when it happened, medyo huli na ang lahat, 'di ba? Hindi na sila maka-cope dun sa naging results. Okay? So, risks that have the potential to undermine strategy and the successful implementation of strategy can destroy more value than risk to operations and tactics. Okay? Purpose of risk classification systems: in order to identify all of the risks facing an organization, a structure of risk identification is required. And again, this would depend on the organization. Depending on the organization, the type of operations that they have, the industry that they're working on, they could develop their own process or their own, sets of criteria on how to identify the risks that they're facing. Identify where similar risks exist within the organization and who would be responsible for setting strategy. Okay? Also, identify the risk appetite, risk capacity, and total risk exposure in relation to each risk, group of similar risk, or generic type of risk. Okay? Normally, itong generic type, mga hazard risk yan kasi it's present in almost every organization. Firm risk scorecard. So, yung firm, di ba, ay financial, infrastructure, reputational, or marketplace. Kapag ito yung ginamit mo in your risk classification, ito yung magiging headings mo. Financial, naka-affect ba siya sa financial, infrastructure, reputation, or marketplace ng company. Okay? So, siya template for the identification of corporate objectives, stakeholder expectations, and most importantly, yung key dependencies din. Analyzing the way in which each risk could impact the key dependencies that support each core process. Okay? So, ayan. It is for the organization to decide which risk classification most fully satisfies its needs and requirements. Kasi nga, iba't ibang companies, iba't ibang organizations, nagkakaiba sila ng level of needs then. Types of needs. Nature of the risk. Okay, ito mga, what do you call that? Classification then, diba? Type of nature of the risk, source of the risk, or nature of the impact of the risk. Okay. But again, balance organization. So, ano yung tingin nila ay best suited for them. Ito mga example ng risk classification. So, you have your hazard control or opportunity, diba? High, medium, or low. And then you have your short term, medium term, or long term. Pero hindi siya kumbaga formal risk classifications. They're informal, but they do help in a way. deciding which risk to prioritize. Okay? Pero yung mga formal, we have COSO, IRM standard, BS 31100, firm, risk scorecard, and the Peso. Okay? So, ito, risk classification systems, ito yung mga formal. Yung sa COSO, yung classifications ng risk, strategic, operations, reporting, and compliance. Sa IRM, financial, strategic, operational, and hazard. Sa British Standard, strategic, program, project, financial, operational. Firm risk scorecard, financial infrastructure, reputational marketplace. Peso, of course, political, economic, sociological, technological, legal, and environmental. Okay? Meron mga similarities, di ba? Yung mga strategic, operational, ayan. But anyhow, again, would depend on the company kung alin ang sa tingin nila ay best suited for them. Okay, define the scope, British Standard, of risk management in the organization, providing a structure and framework for risk identification, giving the opportunity to aggregate similar kinds of risk across the whole organization. Okay, so yung medyo, di ba, dito sa strategic, you could have a few different types of risk, pero kinlassify mo siya under strategic kasi they all affect either, strategic aspect of the business. Suit the size, purpose, nature, complexity, and context of the organization. Reflect the maturity of risk management. Okay? Siyempre, pag medyo baguhan pa lang, edi yung simple lang na classification. But later on, pag medyo nasanay na in their risk management, they could, develop or evolve into much better or more suitable categories for them. COSO framework is in widespread use because it is the recognized and recommended approach for compliance with the requirements of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Okay. Firm risk scorecard reflects the idea that every organization should be concerned about its finances, infrastructure, reputation, and commercial success, or your marketplace. Okay. In a way, it's true. Financial and infrastructure risks are considered to be internal, reputational and marketplace, external. Financial and marketplace, easily quantified in terms of financial terms. Infrastructure and reputational, kind of difficult to quantify. More on, qualitative characteristics. Okay. Attributes of the firm risk scorecard. Okay, so ito yung financial, infrastructure, reputational, marketplace. Description, risks that can impact the way in which money is managed and profitability is achieved. Yung infrastructure, risks that will impact the level of efficiency and dysfunction within the core processes. Okay, infrastructure could pertain to PPE, property, plant, and equipment, or fixed assets of the company. Reputational risks that will impact desire of customers to deal or trade and level of customer retention. Okay, sometimes it has something to do with, the core values of the company, their CSR, corporate social responsibility projects, how they're, disposing their waste, how they're supporting, environmental activities, mga ganyan. Okay? Sometimes yung political stand din ng businesses or kahit members of the board or owner ng business, sometimes it would affect then how they are perceived by the public, Marketplace, risks that will impact the level of customer trade or expenditure and customer retention. Okay, so this is more related to, customer. Okay, external or external, itong financial and infrastructure, internal, and the other two, external. Quantifiable, financial, yes, usually. Infrastructure, sometimes. Reputational, not always. Marketplace, yes. Kasi siya ay, pertains to sales most of the time. And of course, customer service expenses. Measurement, performance indicator, financial, gains and losses. From internal financial control, and then infrastructure, level of efficiency in processes and operations, reputational, nature of publicity, effectiveness of marketing profile, marketplace, income from commercial and market activities. Performance gap procedures, failure of procedures to control internal financial risk sa infrastructure process, failure of processes to operate without dysfunction, and then dito sa reputation, perception, failure to achieve the desired perception of the organization, sa marketplace presence, failure to achieve required presence in the marketplace or yung market share, ganyan. Control mechanisms, so dito sa financial, capex standards, capital expenditures, internal control, delegation of authority, and then dito sa infrastructure, process control, loss control, insurance, and risk financing. Sa reputation, we have marketing, advertising, reputation, and brand protection. And then sa marketplace, we have strategic and business plans, opportunity assessment. Okay. And then we have Peso risk classification. So again, political, economic, sociological, technological, legal, and environmental risk. Okay. So kumbaga, in the operation of the business, you have to consider all these 6 aspects. Most applicable to the analysis of hazard risk and less easy to apply to financial infrastructure and reputational risk. The Peso risk classification, most relevant to the analysis of external risk. Okay? So hazard external should be used in conjunction with an analysis of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So most of the time magkasama sila lagi SWOT and Peso. So yung SWOT analysis of each of the 6 Peso categories is recommended by the Orange Book. Okay. Advantage of the Peso provides a clear analysis of the issue that should be addressed within the external context. Okay. Most applicable in the public sector. Okay. Peso classification, yung political, tax policy, employment laws, environmental regulations, trade restrictions and reform, tariffs, and political stability. Okay, so rules and regulations, laws, kasama din dyan. Okay, not just yung politics itself. Okay, it's not even. Itong part lang na to, yung politics itself, diba? Economic growth or decline, diba? Economic situation currently. Interest rates, exchange rates, inflation rate, wage rates, tumataas ba? Minimum wage. Working hours, unemployment, local and national credit availability, cost of living, etc. Okay. For sociological, cultural norms and expectations, health consciousness, population growth rate, age distribution, career attitudes, emphasis on safety, global warming. Okay. Normally, this would affect yung promotional activities or strategies ng isang company, diba? Because if their target audience, diba? These are needed to be identified, diba? When you're trying to find your niche, diba? Yung mga norms and expectations, health consciousness, ganyan. Population growth rate, age distribution, career attitudes, ganyan. Ay, mapapansin nyo, in a way, we describe their audience or the customers. So you have to take into account these things. Technological changes the impact your products or services, new technologies, barriers to entry in given markets, financial decisions like outsourcing and supply chain, and of course, iba yung presence nyo online, if you have it. Legal changes to legislation may impact employment, access to materials, quotas, resources, imports or exports, and then they have taxation. Okay. So medyo related itong political and legal. Okay. But more on compliance itong sa legal. Itong political, existing laws talaga sila. Environmental, ecological, and environmental aspects, although many of these factors will be economic or social in nature. So medyo, in a way, medyo nag-overlap din yung some of these. Anyway, advantages and disadvantages of the Peso analysis. Advantage niya, simpler framework, facilitates an understanding of the wider business environment, encourages the development of external and strategic thinking, enables an organization to anticipate future business threats and take action to avoid or minimize their impact, enables an organization to spot business opportunities and exploit them fully. Ang disadvantage, some users oversimplify the amount of data used for decisions. Needs to be undertaken on a regular basis to be effective kasi mayroong mga changes na nangyayari, especially yung sa social, environmental, political din a bit. Requires different people being involved, each having a different perspective. Access to quality external data sources can be time-consuming and costly, yes. Sometimes hindi siya easily available. Peso change, kasi normally, diba, you have your competition, of course. They would keep the information to themselves unless yun nga, magkaroon ng understanding between competitors. But again, competitors kasi. So, understandable and yet disappointing. Peso change makes it increasingly difficult to anticipate developments that may affect an organization in the future. Risk of capturing too much data that it may make it difficult to see priorities. Napasobra naman. Can be based on assumptions that subsequently prove to be unfounded. Okay, so sometimes if you're going to use assumptions in Peso analysis, minimize the assumptions and as much as possible, use realistic situations na talaga. Yun nangyari na talaga. Okay. Hazard control and opportunity risk. So, categorizing risk according to single risk classification is not always helpful. So, medyo combination. Again, depending on the needs of the business. Time scale of the impact, nature of the impact. It is for each organization to identify the risk classification that suits its particular needs and the nature of the risk facing the organization. Okay, so again, pwede rin yung source or impact ng risk, time scale of the impact. Firm risk scorecard, combination niya with hazard control and opportunity required in order to provide a complete picture. So, example niya, firm risk scorecard plus yung hazard control opportunity risk. Okay. Combination ng dalawa. Okay, ito example ng personal issues greed. So, you have yung firm, financial, infrastructure, reputational, saka market risk. Tapos, on the other side, you have your long-term, medium, or short-term. Okay, so ayan. Can go over this on your own para get an understanding of an example lang naman ito. Combination, firm risk scorecard, and then you have the short, medium, and long-term classification. The table illustrates the balance of operational project and strategic issues. Okay. Again, yung operational is short-term, project is medium, strategic is long-term. Okay, classification of risk-facing projects is essential so that the appropriate response to each risk can be identified. Should be delivered on time, within budget, and to specifications. Normally, yun yung tawag dito. Hindi naman required, but pang requirements na rin yan. When you're dealing with or when you're doing a project. Okay? So, ayun lang for chapter 14. Again, we have risk classification system. Right? So, that's it for this one. Thanks and bye.